Okay, here we go. Almost finished. This is the third body paragraph, the counterclaim. Now, this is super important. The counterclaim is not a place where you just start talking about why one of the other ideals is important. That's arguing against yourself and weakens your essay. If you do this paragraph right, you have an awesome essay that is super strong. So, this is where you choose another ideal and you explain why it is less important than the one that you chose. You're going to use information from the documents in the DBQ packet to explain the other ideal just a little bit, and then you're going to show why the ideal you chose is more important, using the sources that you need to use for that. It has to come from some sources to help you out, but a lot of this paragraph is what you choose and how you explain it. So here we go. I am going back to consent of the governed as the ideal I chose. Now remember, your essay has to be the same all the way through. I'm just changing back and forth because that way nobody can copy exactly what I have. Please come up with your own reasons. You can use some of my ideas, but you need to use your own words. So I am going to argue that equality is less important than consent of the governed. And so I'm going to put equality in this first blank. Some people say that equality is more important than consent of the governed, but that is wrong. Okay, so the first blank is what I'm saying is a little less important. Equality is still pretty important, but consent of the governed I think is more important. So here I'm going to explain just briefly why I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong because consent of the governed has been used repeatedly throughout history to make people more equal. It's how we get to equality. That's my basic claim here, why consent of the governed is so important. So I'm going to start in this bright yellow section here, explain the ideal that is less important, equality. I haven't really defined that somewhere else in my essay yet, so I'm going to do that here. Okay, so I'm just going to define equality, and then I'm going to introduce a quote from the packet, and then I'm going to put the quote in from the packet. So I'm going to use a quote from the Diana Pham article. So I already had that copied and pasted, of course. Oh, I apparently don't have the packet open right now. Well, work on fixing that. Maybe? All right, while it's working on that. So I introduced this, and now this quote is coming from the packet. That's where I'm getting it. And my computer's designed to be a little slow. There we go. All right, so all the way down at document A, right here. So I decided to use these last two sentences from this quote. My source is still going to be Diana Pham, 2012. And we don't need to use a first name, just last name is good enough. And then I need to explain what the quote says about equality. Okay, I'm not arguing against it here yet. I'm just explaining what that quote means. And so I'm saying equality is what makes the American dream possible, a possibility for people from all backgrounds. That's what I'd already mentioned, that Diana Pham was a Vietnamese immigrant up here. So notice how that's really, really short. Normally I say your explanation needs to be longer than your quote. Here, mine ended up being a little bit shorter, but I'm going to write a whole lot more of my own words here in this next section. So when you put the whole paragraph together, it's not going to seem like I'm using too much of a quote. The emphasis on this paragraph, is still on the ideal you chose. So that's where most of the words should be. So see how I'm writing a whole lot here. Okay. So I'm pivoting, I'm using this transition word of however. That might be one that you want to use. You're welcome to use the word however. There's others too. You can say on the other hand, or something like that. Okay, so I'm saying here's what equality is. It's important because it makes the American dream possibility. However, looking back at history shows that equal opportunities were often denied to groups such as Asian immigrants, referring to that because Diana Pham was a Vietnamese immigrant, or other people of color. Equality was expanded through people protesting to call attention to inequality and then voting for people who would support expanding equality to more people. So you'll notice that I'm talking about equality here, and I'm talking about things that are related to consent of the governed, like protests and voting. So I'm kind of mixing the two together there. That's the strategy I'm using. That's the reasoning that I'm using. It's a pretty effective kind of reasoning for this essay. It's not always, but for this essay, that works really well, because this essay, it's just not just either one side or the other. Later on, this spring, it'll be a one side or the other essay, and in the past, sometimes you have done a one side or the other essay. Was John Brown a hero or a terrorist? There's no in between there. So you couldn't really say, well, he's a little of each as much. This one, it's fine to say all four ideals are important. In fact, I hope you do say all four ideals are important. So, whoops. All right. So here I'm kind of mixing them together, showing how they relate. Then I need to support why it's more important with a quote from the packet or research. So I found a website because I want to talk about, let's see, what was it I said? Looking back at history shows that equal opportunities were often denied. Oh, and equality was expanded through people protesting. I better have some evidence to back that up. Just saying I'm a history teacher, I know these things, isn't quite good enough. I need to have specific examples. And so I looked that up. I knew I wanted to talk about a good example was the civil rights protests and the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And so I found this article. It's from history.com. There we go. Now you can see it. History.com. And there's this one sentence right here. It's kind of a long sentence, but I'm going to use the whole thing because it's exactly what I needed. In 1963, as civil rights activists were protesting segregation and voting restrictions, President John F. Kennedy introduced the first major civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. Protests were already happening. So I am copying that and pasting it. Whoops. Pasting it there. And now I need the citation. And so with articles like history.com or websites like that, you want to look to see if you can find the author's name. Here, this is by Pruitt. And so I'm going to put Pruitt. I don't really need Sarah, but Pruitt, and then I need the date. And she wrote this in 2018. They're both 2018. I just need the year, and so I don't have to decide which date to use. If you run into something where you need to decide the date, then that's fine. And here, when I did this before, I didn't think to leave off Sarah. I'm going to go ahead and put down that's from history.com because that's going to be easier for people if they want to find it. You don't have to put down the website that you used. All right, so the reasoning then. I need to really explain, how does this quote support this, and how does it show that the consent of the governed is more important? I've already kind of explained it, but I need to explain it even more thoroughly. And so you see I have a good long section there to explain it. I'm not going to read all that to you, but the next section then is the concluding sentence. And here, summary or concluding sentence is usually going to be pretty short, sweet, but you're going to refer back to your claim. You're always going to be coming back to, why is that ideal that I chose most important? And so I kind of summarize everything. While equality is an important ideal to strive to achieve, the consent of the governed is more important because it is the tool that people throughout history have used to improve their lives and the lives of others around them. So I might say a tool that the people of the United States, or something like that Americans, there we go, Americans throughout history have used. There we go. That's more specific because, people in ancient Mesopotamia didn't really have consent of the governed so much. Can't say throughout all history. All right. So that is paragraph 3. I will be back with another video for the working on claim statement and conclusion, and then the graphic organizer will be done.